Let me introduce our first speaker. I had the surprising honor in the early 90s of the last century to meet Lois Swope. It was wonderful to meet her and to discover the story that she's going to elaborate on and share with you today. I'm forgetting all the details, but I think it was in 1983 that the first known assessment and diagnosis of something called Rett Syndrome appeared. And Lois's daughter was born in 1985. And the ambiguity I just spoke about was commonplace for Lois, her family, and for their daughter, trying to figure out who this person was and all of the capabilities and gifts that she might have. So she's going to come and share the story of, think about it, even with medical knowledge, sometimes we can deal with lack of information or ambiguity or uncertainty, but here she was on the cusp of something that even the medical establishment did not know about. It was a mystery. And it took 6 to 10 years before her daughter got a full assessment. I had the privilege of meeting the both of them in those early years of the 90s and watching this mother and her wonderful care of her child, and then we kind of drifted apart for a time, and then I saw an interview with Lois, and the story was being shared of the life that followed the years that I knew her, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to reach out and be with this woman again, and we began to meet for coffee and share the stories, and that's led to her being invited to be our speaker today. Lois, we welcome you. Come up and share your story so that we can learn from you.
Bear with me while I get things set up here. Over. Thank you, Ted. Thank you. I appreciate I was working at the Wilder Foundation in the early 90s, and that's when I first heard Ted speak. Oh. All right, I'm going to try and do 3 things here. I'll do my best with the mic. I think I've got it. Let me just make sure. Start there. Well, I see some familiar faces in the audience, and I really am grateful for the friends and family who have come to support me today. I had the great honor a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago, to go visit Crescent Cove, and that's when I was first introduced to a number of people that Ted has been working with for a long time, and it was remarkable to see what is available to families going through some of the deepest, most difficult times in their life. So I'm so impressed. Is this working? Okay, very good. Thank you, dear. So I'd like to start with each of our stories is unique, as is each of our children. My daughter taught me so many things, but most of all, she taught me how to love and hope in the midst of extraordinary circumstances. I dug deep into our photo archive and found some vintage photos for you. Ted was mentioning that he had more hair back in the day. As you'll see, my hair has changed color, which is kind of remarkable what happens. So this is my journey. Yours will obviously be different. And while I don't have your answers, I will share some of the lessons I learned along the way that would have been helpful for me to know way back at the beginning. I was present for Karly's first breath and held her in my arms while she breathed her last 27 years later. We lived a whole lot of life in between. I was Karly's audible voice to the world, her medical and education advocate, her primary caregiver, social director, manager of her PCAs, and the person on point every day to keep her alive and help her thrive. Many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not here just to talk about that side of this incredible dynamic, but I'm going to share 3 hard-fought lessons I learned by coming alongside Karly. I hope what she taught me might also be of value to you. I want to mention this photo here. I had no idea I was in this picture when it was taken. As you'll hear later on, Karly composed music, and we were in the studio doing headshots for her CD cover, and the photographer captured this moment that I'm so grateful for because it tells our story. Karly had a keyboard on her lap, like she used for typing and answering. The photographer was asking her questions, and she was typing out her answers, and I was looking at her keyboard to see what she was saying. But I feel like me facing Karly, Karly facing the world became our story. So I'm really grateful for this, and it's on a portrait on our wall at home. Karly lived a full life until she died at home on August 20th, 2012, when she was 27. She was not only my daughter, she was my best teacher, my hardest, but by far my best. We shared all the joy, pain, hardship, and deep love that many parents of children with complex medical and physical needs experience. Karly and I were a team then, and we're teaming up today on this talk. I'll tell you some stories from our life together, including direct quotes from the many journals she left us with. I have the good fortune of carrying on her legacy by offering her insights into life. I hope our story inspires you to believe in the potential of every individual you encounter beyond their diagnosis, even when there's a complex medical condition that may shorten their lives. Here's a peek into our family story, complete with pictures. This is Leah Joy, my firstborn daughter, and she made me feel so good as a mom. She was content, very content. She hardly ever cried. Alert, smart, engaging, and capable from an early age, and she embraced life. I felt like a successful parent. She made it easy, and I decided that this parenting thing really wasn't so hard after all. By the way, when I looked through these vintage photos, I noticed I cringe at the lack of safety measures that were in place back in the day. Some of you younger parents will notice some of these and go, oh my. Let's see. Sorry. When Karly was born on July 4th, 3 years and 3 days after Leah, her needs challenged me in every possible way. I spent Karly's lifetime advocating for her education, health care, seeking and retaining caregivers, but struggling most of all to find out what was going on. Most miraculous of all, discovering that Karly had many hidden talents and intellect we had been assured was not possible. What we didn't know when Karly was a baby was that very few people in the world knew about Rett syndrome, just like Ted was telling us. The first child diagnosed with this disorder in the US was in 1983, which was when it was introduced in an English medical journal just 2 years before she was born. Karly was born typical. There was no sign anything was going on with her or that she was going to have any extra challenges until she was a few months old. She had developed low muscle tone, wasn't able to roll over or attempting to hold objects. She wasn't able to sit unassisted until she was 3.5 years old. And that was due to our little puppy that we got, and he would come up and lick her face, and she decided she figured out if she pushed really hard, she could stay seated. I was most often the expert in the room when we sought medical attention. Even here in Minnesota, when we have access to such progressive health care, we never sat in front of a doctor while Karly was alive that knew more about Rett syndrome than I did. It put me at the hub of all of her care, a job that was overwhelming, to say the least. Because I was no more equipped than the next person, because I have no formal medical training. You'll enjoy this photo here of the walker that was delivered to our house by a durable medical equipment company. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this kind of walker, but it was very dangerous. It did fall over on Karly a few times, but we did wrap the legs around it, so if she hit things, it would, be less damaging. This is how Rett syndrome affected Karly. She never spoke or walked independently. She had enormous struggles with apraxia, the inability to physically perform what her brain wanted to do, a motor planning problem, a body-brain connection problem, not an intelligence issue. It could take up to 2 minutes for her body to respond to a simple request. She began hyperventilating at age 4 and then added breath holding to that at age 12. Karly would turn blue hundreds of times daily for the rest of her life. She developed seizures at 5 that even with our best efforts were never controlled. She drummed on any surface she could reach with her left hand and chewed on bandanas throughout her waking hours, soaking up to 50 bandanas a day with saliva that flowed freely. She had severely impaired vision. Debilitating anxiety was her constant companion. And worst of all, we had no way for her to communicate with us until she was 10 years old. Later on, Rett syndrome would be described as 5 disorders in one: cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, Parkinson's, and the final kick in the pants, acute anxiety. The symptoms of each of these disorders were in that one little person. I won't forget the day I sat reading with her on the couch in the sunny living room window, trying to decide between a book that would be suitable for her age or a book written for toddlers. She was nearly 5 years old. I chose a toddler book based on the assurance of specialists that Karly was functioning at less than 1-year-old level. Even with her limited hand function, she grabbed that book and threw it across the room. That made me pause. I looked at her, and she turned and looked deep into my eyes for an extended period, something she rarely did, and I knew at that moment that she was far more intelligent than she was able to demonstrate. You know that feeling deep in your gut? I think all parents have had it when their children are young, but it even grows more acute, I think, when you have a child with special needs, is that you have this sense of knowing. But I wanted to crawl inside of that look and help her speak. I only heard her say one word in her entire life, and that was when we were looking at an ABC book, and we looked at a cat, and I said, "What does a cat say?" And she said, "Meow." And then she tried to say it again, and she got out the first part, and then the third time there was silence. She was 4. It would take many more years before we finally figured out a way for her to communicate. But she had always been in there. After that incident on the couch, what changed for me was my belief that she was far more intelligent than she was able to demonstrate. And while it would take years to find a way for her to finally communicate with us, what changed was I no longer just talked about her in front of her. I didn't talk about her in front of doctors or therapists. I included her in the conversation. I believed that she heard and understood a lot of what I was saying, It changed Karly and it changed me. I'm sure that any of us who have been in some of these appointments trying to determine what is going on with a child would agree that it's deficit seeking. A lot of these appointments are about what isn't working, what is wrong, what can we do, and those conversations would take place in front of Karly, and she would be so distressed. And I turned that around. I turned the narrative around and just wanted to focus more on what she was capable of doing. One day, I was sitting at the table eating a bowl of Cheerios with milk next to Karly, and it was something she wasn't able to eat because of a severe dairy allergy. She reached for my bowl, and instead of me pulling it away from her, I looked into her eyes and I said, "It's really hard when you want something so much. It would give you such a bad stomachache, Karly. I'm really, really sorry." I noticed she calmed immediately and gazed into my eyes. She felt understood, and I was able to acknowledge that she understood me. She was less sad, less desperate, had more direct eye gaze, a deeper connection with people, like she was thanking me for believing in her intellect and capacity. The main drive most parents have after their baby is born, our one job is to keep them alive, to do everything in our power to ease their suffering, nourish their bodies, take away their pain, and be available to them. But for some of us, no matter what we do, we can't make it better. As many of you know, watching your child suffer is one of the most heart-wrenching experiences a parent can have. The bond many of us have known with our newborn babies only grows deeper and more protective if that child has a complex medical condition or disability. This is Karly with one of her caregivers that worked with us for 17 years. Amy was a full-time teacher in Minneapolis at the time, in the Minneapolis public schools, and she would still come out every Tuesday evening and spend it with Karly until Karly's death. She was actually present just shortly after Karly died. It was around this age when Karly's pediatrician handed me a copy of an article from a medical journal introducing Rett Syndrome. I was reading our story for the first time. She sent us to a pediatric geneticist who had seen a couple other girls with Rett syndrome here in Minnesota. There was a list of clinical symptoms, which was all we had to go on at that time. Karly had 8 out of the 10. Finally, we had some understanding about what was happening to her. Karly was 12. When she was 13, she was not flourishing in school. She was so unhappy. The administrators told me I was making a huge mistake when I decided to move her to another school district. It turned out to be the best thing we could have done. I wish we had done it sooner, but she was so vulnerable and her health so fragile that it grieved me to send her 17 miles away on a bus by herself. With an amazing teacher, therapist, and fresh eyes that truly saw Karly, she thrived. And she belonged. While she still had few opportunities for formal education, she was believed in and valued in a school setting for the first time in her life. Her new teacher gave Karly opportunities we only dreamed about prior to this time. She would go to school with a smile and often return home with a smile, which was a brand new experience for us. Our family was musical. Leah and I played piano daily for many years. Karly would sit on my lap, I don't have many pictures of it because there was usually no one there to take a picture. Things were very different back in the day when it comes to pictures, by the way. Karly would sit on my lap while I played from the time she was an infant. And I continued to do that daily until I could no longer see over her head. She was probably about 5 years old. It was one of the few things that calmed her when she was a baby. One of the best things about moving Karly to a new school district was meeting Karen Bonert, who became Karly's music therapist. Karen was curious whether Karly could compose music and created a way for her to do so. Up to that time, the music therapy Karly had experienced was attempting to strum a guitar or tap a drum. Her apraxia made this nearly impossible and at best inconsistent. Karen is here today with us. It's an honor to have you here, Karen. I'm so grateful to see you. She found a way for Karly to select from cards. Up, Karen can tell this better than me, but up, down, stay the same. She would have them and Velcros behind them on a board. Up by half, whole or quarter note. Karly would select the appropriate card based on the tune she carried in her head until she had the opportunity to meet with Karen. If she was having a good day, they may get a bar or two completed each session. Each song took between 9 months and 2 years to complete. The dedication both of them had was remarkable and a gift that continues to this day. During the first year, Karly moved to South Campus. I received a special invitation to her classroom. She was 14 years old. I was told she and Karen had been working on something and were ready to share it. I wasn't prepared for what happened that day. They had been working together less than a year. But I arrived at the school and saw teachers, administrators, and other students prepared to hear what Karly had completed. And I heard her first song along with everyone else. And honestly, I was stunned. I had no idea she had music inside her waiting to be expressed. While she couldn't play her songs, Karen could. Karly titled her first song Ever After, and as she later said, that song changed my life. I was no longer just the young girl with profound mental retardation. I was a composer. I was a musician. I had a voice that others could hear. This is a dear friend, Barbara McAfee, who ended up producing Karly's music. But whenever I look at pictures of them together, I think they kind of belong together because they look very similar. I spent some time with Barbara a couple weekends ago, and she said I feel like they look like they are sisters. After 10 years of working with Karen, Karly had completed 9 songs, and she asked to record her music. We were introduced to Barbara McAfee, who produced Karly's music. It was an incredible experience, hearing the music Karly had composed, played by a professional musician. Karly sat next to the soundboard in the studio, giving direction of how she wanted her songs to be performed. Karly asked Leah to accompany her songs with viola. Leah wrote the accompaniment, and she read 2 of Karly's poems for her CD. I had never heard Karly's speaking voice other than when she said meow. So it was so moving for me to hear Leah read Karly's poems. My daughter, who couldn't speak, left us with her voice, and her voice includes music and poetry. Karly had been sick for many weeks prior to her studio date. We had no idea until the morning of the recording if Karly would be well enough to participate in the recording. This was often the case with any plans we had. There was a lot at stake on those 2 recording days, as there was a large team of people prepared to be there with and for Karly, Leah, who came from home from college, Karen, Barbara, friends, family, and a professional pianist. Being Karly's mom taught me some important lessons about living, caring, and dying well. I will share some of them with you today, and I hope they help you when you are working with families like ours. The first one that I learned through years of hard knocks with Karly was everyone is more than their symptoms. See the whole person, not just their diagnosis. Many of us in this room know that diagnoses are so important, and they drive funding, services, supports, caregivers, equipment, opportunities offered, and people's beliefs in what they may or may not be capable of. When a child is born with high needs, their parents experience a pile of red tape served on a very large platter. We find ourselves in a maze with many dead ends and unexpected turns. You're well aware how complex social services and our educational and medical systems are, especially for individuals living with rare, often misunderstood, complex conditions where a label or diagnosis becomes the main thing. But it isn't the main thing. No one wants to be known by their biggest, most personal health condition. Can you imagine your response if I introduced myself like this? Hello, my name is Lois, and I have ocular rosacea. Want to know more? Most people would probably find a reason to walk away. By the way, I give that 0 stars, the ocular rosacea. It just all is awkward. However, if I have a diagnosis such as Rett Syndrome, it is a lens that clouds many people's vision of what I might be capable of. But unlike many of us, Karly couldn't hide her physical limitations. By the time she was 5 years old, we had seen dozens of doctors and therapists of every type: OT, PT, communication specialists, neurologists, geneticists, physiologists, chiropractors, you name it. No stone was left unturned trying to help her. And that was before GPS. I'm dating myself here, but there was no GPS back in the day. We didn't have phones that we drove around in our cars either. Does anybody here remember the Hudson map book? Or am I that old that I'm the only one? Okay, yeah. Hudson map books. And I remember I couldn't sort that out to save my life. I would pull over to the side of the road trying to figure out where we were, and then flipping through all these pages trying to sort out where you're supposed to go. I remember thinking, I think everybody's floor plan in their life and their home is in this book here. And I just remember feeling baffled and very frustrated and stressed, trying to get to all these doctor appointments. Little Leah went to most of these appointments with Karly. It certainly wasn't what I would have chosen for Leah. She got really good at entertaining herself, but I was caught between trying to meet Karly's needs and the very different needs and opportunities for Leah. I'm so grateful for the people in Karly's life who worked with us to help find her strengths and interests and find a way for her to express them. In the end, Karly's wish came true. Rett syndrome is not the only thing said of her. I'm going to offer some takeaways for lesson 1. I doubt that there's anybody in this room that struggles with this, because you guys are all remarkable people, but it's not always a given, as we know. See the child as a whole person, not just a diagnosis, and make their diagnosis and label smaller and the quality of their life bigger. My little Karly typed this out shortly after we found a way for her to communicate. Assume intellect. And then she typed out later, just because I'm silent doesn't mean I'm ignorant. We often hear presumed competence. Years later, Karly typed out, before I had communication, I was so oppressed, I wanted to die. I was a little girl, and I felt that way. In 1997, it was assumed that along with every other skill children with Rett syndrome lost, their intelligence was affected as well. Standardized tests were not an accurate measure of intellect for someone with so many physical limitations and no way to communicate. Karly also told us, my brain is intelligent. It's my body that struggles. Her educators and school therapists were confident their tests accurately determined that Karly was profoundly mentally impaired. Karly said it this way, during the time I started school, they assumed I was unable to read, so I was offered nothing in school that would help me gain more skills in writing or reading. The things they offered me were what they would have offered to a small child. Life skills, they said, were what I needed to focus on, end quote. Life skills in Karly's case meant sorting shapes, matching colors, and attempting to remove her hat. She was never successful at these skills, so they remained on her IEP for many years. She would never be able to remove her hat, not because of low intelligence or unwillingness, like we were informed, but because of apraxia. Everything changed the day we met a new communication specialist who came to our house to assess Karly. And I'd like to say something before I read her quote. We had been working for years to try and figure out a way for Karly to communicate with us, and she had had speech therapy from the time she was a baby. But this was the beginning of communication in its forms that is available today. Augmentative communication was new, and so was all the, the computer technology and stuff. But this woman was actually a director of the Minnesota Autism Society, came out, and she was a speech pathologist, and she found, this is what Karly says about that day. When the day came that Carrie, the communication specialist, came to our house, I already knew how to spell many words. That's a whole nother story. During her evaluation, she showed me picture cards. When I got those right, she used cards with words and pictures. When I selected the right card while she was supporting my wrist out of a group of cards, she then went on to word cards. By the end of the session, she brought out a little typewriter that had a piece of paper that came out the side. When I pushed the buttons, the paper held my words. I knew that my words were now going to be seen. It was a great time in our lives. It was a simple message if I were able to type it all, but it made me feel hope for my life for the first time. Before I had my keyboard, I was so sad and scared, end quote. I remember something happening during that assessment. Karly typed out a question. Now, I had never heard my daughter communicate prior to this. So anything she typed that day, those little ticker tapes were kept and taped into a journal. But she asked a question, can you record? I was like, profoundly mentally impaired, can you record? It even boggled my mind what was happening in front of me. But what she was asking was, will this hold my words? Is there a way for my words to now be seen? And she was asking that because she heard Leah, who was loved to read at an early age, creating books on tape over in the corner on her cassette tape player. And she would read a book and then make a sound, and then you would know you were supposed to turn the page. And so Karly was asking that. And so that level of intelligence, she demonstrated that very first day. Over her lifetime, Karly would use her keyboard with 14 different women and other forms of communication with numerous people. Karly said, start by believing that I have something to say. Can you imagine how she felt? What I was feeling? How it affected every part of our lives when we found a way for her to communicate with us. I no longer had to guess. She could tell me if she was cold, where she had pain, what she was feeling, her experiences with friends or caregivers. One day she was sitting in the kitchen on the floor, and I brought her keyboard to her, and she typed out, certain teeth hurt. I'm like, in your mouth? Yes. So, as you know, it's really hard to brush children's teeth who have a lot of oral sensory stuff. And so we tried desperately every day to do that. We took her to the dentist and found out she had 2 teeth that needed crowns. So yeah, she had 2 certain teeth hurt. But it was just, all those things were affirming for me that she was capable of having a voice in her own life. Every day she was able, she started the day by letting me know she loved me, that she loved Greg and I. You would know how much that meant to us. Because every single letter Karly was able to type was precious. Nearly every conversation was carefully recorded into journals, just as she typed them. We have 3 bins full of her journals. I don't have to say she said something like, because I can go to her journals and find exactly what she said. She's most likely the most documented Rett girl that ever lived. Can you imagine having someone follow you around with a notepad and paper and just writing down every single thing you say throughout the day? But because it took a lot of effort for her to type, each letter was so precious. And when she first learned how to communicate, it was very slow and methodical, but towards the end of her life, she was a prolific writer. Quality of life correlates with the ability to communicate our needs, interests, and wants. But I would say start by believing it's possible that the child or adult in front of you may have something to say. This photo I selected from it's a very vintage photo, obviously, but Karly was in a rowboat. That's why she has a life vest on. And we had spent the afternoon at a very, very quiet lake near our house in a rowboat. And Karly loved water, was soothed by it. But after spending the afternoon here, she wrote a story with a friend. It was a fantastic story of a boy and a fish who would bring him food while he was in a boat. She would write a paragraph, and her friend would write the next. They would send emails back and forth. Years later, our neighbor introduced Karly to blogging and set up a blog page for her. I know everybody in here knows what a blog is, but back in 2008, I wasn't so sure. Karly titled her blog Spirit Dances. I wasn't even sure what a blog was, like I said, and I thought Karly would want to share pictures or maybe a couple poems or something that she had written. I had no idea what the possibilities were. But Karly immediately used it as a place to share her experiences living in her own body with her disorder and her insights into life. Thousands of people went to her blog and left her the most thoughtful messages. Parents of kids with special needs would reach out to her and ask her, what about this? When this happens to you at night, what does it feel like in your body? And she would respond. I, as a parent, you would all know that when you have a very vulnerable child, just like you're caught between this wanting to protect them and wanting them to have real life, real lived experiences. And so I wasn't sure, I was always more guarded than Karly was, but it got obvious that she was capable of saying, I want to respond to this and not to this question. People from all over the world, including researchers on Rett syndrome, because they had never met a child with Rett syndrome who could actually answer the questions for these Rett research, you know what I'm saying. They went to her blog page for understanding. I checked her blog last week, and she's had just shy of 180,000 visitors to it. Karly was able to write in one of her blog posts that she titled My Own Experience. If people assumed I was not intelligent, they said some really awful things right in front of me. Many of my memories of going to doctors and therapy visits are painful to remember. Sometimes they would talk about me in front of me, saying whatever they wanted to say to my parents, and then turn to me and talk baby talk and speak loud. If someone thinks you are profoundly mentally impaired, they don't worry about what they say in front of you. They don't worry if your feelings are hurt. They don't worry that they might be completely wrong, end quote. As many of you know, too many people who are nonverbal are often spoken to, or not spoken to because someone assumes they're too limited to understand. I'm going to give Karly the last word on this one for takeaway. She was invited to write a piece for the Women's Press. And she said, I hope when you meet someone who is unable to speak that you assume they are intelligent and may change their life to have just one person believe, end quote. And this one I'm going to credit to my dear husband, Greg, who is present here. Don't wait until life isn't hard to embrace moments of joy. You may be thinking that Karly had a pretty great life when she was able to communicate and have a voice in her own life. But the truth is, about 75% of her life was spent dealing with the effects of Rett syndrome and the limitations it created. Karly had a lot of pain, physical and emotional. Our weeks were full of appointments and therapies, searching for relief. We would make plans to attend an event or an outing, and it would be cut short by a big seizure that ruled it out, followed by painful headaches that could last a couple days. Her anxiety was debilitating at times. Breathing issues that were exhausting and scary. And literally, some days it was nonstop. From the time her body was exposed to sunlight or light in the room, she would start holding her breath. She was involuntary, she couldn't control it. Start holding her breath until she turned blue. So that was an extended period of time, and then she would start hyperventilating to respond, and then that would go back and forth, back and forth. And as many people have experienced here, I'm sure that we had challenges with consistent caregivers that made our lives very unstable. Karly loved sitting by the water. This is on a dock at a lake near our house. She often, when she was writing for her blog, she'd like to be near the water or in the paddock with her little horse. Water and horses calmed her nervous system enough to regulate her breathing and reduce her anxiety. And this is little Bo. Karly named him Bo when he came to us at 15 months old. She said, "He is my sweet, handsome friend." He lived in our backyard in a miniature barn. He had a minivan that he rode around in. We have pictures of him with his head sticking out the side of that minivan. He actually still does that kind of work. He's with a program now that takes him into like the Capitol and places like that, you know. But he had a little pasture, small paddock, little barn in our backyard. He was 36 inches tall at the shoulder. And this day, I just happened to have my cell phone with me and was able to capture this image. She had had seizures during the night. Bo met us at the gate, and he took a deep breath and started scanning her body. He started with one of her feet, and he slowly went up her body, up to her head, smelling deeply the whole way, and then down the other side, and ended at her feet. And we moved into the paddock and sat next to the barn here. Karly said, "I just want to spend time with Bo and relax today." And he took a deep breath, and he regulated her breathing with her. So that's why they're sitting here with their visors on. He's a little character. For families like ours, lots of suffering and struggle goes on behind closed doors. As our children age, we experience more isolation and loneliness. Parents have to say no to many invitations with family or friends because we don't have quality care for our child, or an emergency halts plans in their tracks. And for many of us, even the invitations eventually stop. As you know, here in Minnesota, we call casseroles hot dishes. In fact, we can tell you're an outsider when you call it a casserole. We all have our favorites. Some of you here may have experienced hot dish disorders, the kind where everyone rallies and comes up with involved plans to help someone in a crisis. A heart attack, surgery, birth or death in the family. These episodes are well understood, and our community mobilizes to help, bringing food. Now they might just do DoorDash or some of those other cool things that are available to us now, but back in the day, hot dishes. But for many people living with a chronic illness or disorder, the phone doesn't ring with calls of concern after the first few weeks. Families get burned out from the need and may distance themselves. Some friends disappear. Churches get compassion fatigue from an individual that needs so much ongoing support. And for parents like me, worry, fear, and what ifs are a constant companion. What if I get injured or die? Who will love her or believe in her like I do? Am I focusing too much on one child? How is this impacting my other children or my marriage? By the way, it's common for parents who have a child with high needs to hear that their marriage is likely to fail. Some people even include statistics. I think we can all say that this is not helpful information. We can't make proclamations about their marriage or their life. They're living with extraordinary challenges. They really need an ally. When Karly was 23, we got the idea of taking a longer road trip with her. We rented an RV, got the funding together, had caregivers who got really involved with helping prepare all of her meals in advance and freeze them. We had a caregiver go along with us, and we headed to the Black Hills. Anybody who's been to Custer State Park might recognize these little faces that would show up at your vehicle. They come and they look in at you. They're little wild burros. So this is one that was looking in through the window at Karly. Karly was not well the entire trip, but she typed out, "I can be sick anywhere. I choose to be sick when I choose to be in the Black Hills when I am sick." We actually went on a wild horse sanctuary tour, and when we pulled up with Karly, and she was not feeling well enough that day to even sit up in the back seat, but we got a private Jeep tour. And this remarkable woman who was very active in her community and caring for adults with special needs and drove buses and stuff, she took us on this most marvelous tour all over this huge sanctuary. So we got to go in amongst the wild horses, and Karly laid down in the back seat. And I've got a very special rock that she let us take from that amazing facility. And it's in my office now. But Karly, I mean, some of our best memories, some of the best memories that Greg and I have with Karly are on that trip. It was arduous to navigate that area with someone who was a wheelchair user. We couldn't have done it without the support of many people. Karly wrote a poem while sitting in front of the RV on the last night we were there. She titled it, "My Impossible Yes." Would you guys like to hear it? I sit in the shadows of the Black Hills in all their beauty. I am in awe. For me to travel has been a great feat. I am not alone here. You see, I depend on the legs and backs of many people to enjoy this magnificent place. If I were able, I would drive through the hills and feed the curious burros that came to greet me. I would take pictures of buffalo as they wandered the hills in herds. I would run up and down the hills shouting with joy. I would sit quietly, watching the wild horses who live in as much freedom as they are able, their family bonds offering safety and comfort. I carry these memories in my heart. Thanks to my family, I have done the impossible. Yes. I have no takeaway for this one, but don't we all need to focus a little more on the moments of joy in our lives? In a lifetime of intense struggle and pain, we experience times of incredible beauty and joy. Over the last 2 years of Karly's life, she had opportunities I never imagined would be possible for her. Even public speaking. She would type out exactly what she wanted me to say, or what she wanted to say, and she would have me speak it when we would go to these events. I was telling Ted last night, I think we had at least 20 different speaking opportunities that Karly was able to participate in, which is a dream that I would never have dreamt for my daughter. She decided what she wanted to say yes to and was clear when she didn't feel the opportunity was right for her. But her health was declining. She had so many doctor and therapy appointments each week trying to ease her suffering. She had a swallow study, new seizure meds, neurology appointments, acupuncture, dietary changes with little change in her well-being. Even with our best efforts, Karly's health had deteriorated and we couldn't find solutions. She wasn't able to swallow for extended periods of time. We were in the ER on a number of occasions trying to hydrate. One of the things I miss most about Karly is that Greg and I started each morning together in her room, and she would talk with us about life and what she wanted to do that day. I won't forget the Sunday morning in February 2012 when she typed this, quote, "If my heart stops, do not start it. If I cannot swallow, do not give me a feeding tube," end quote. She was smiling. Smiling her big, joy-filled smile. She was reassuring us. I could hardly breathe. Even though all of our best efforts were not helping her, I was not ready to stop trying. But Karly was. Because it wasn't just a passing feeling or a bad day or exhaustion. She had clarity and peace and was ready to share it with anyone that would listen. Her doctor, family, caregivers, her hospice team. She told us, "I'm not trying to die. I'm just accepting what is happening to my body. It's my time. I've said yes to everything I was supposed to do here." It shouldn't be too surprising that Karly led the way in making decisions about her end of life. This precious horse that she's on, you can't see him very much, but Chester was a special horse. He was a foxtrotter and lived at a friend's farm near us. And they would often have Karly come out, and if we had sidewalkers, she would be able to go for a ride. I just happened to be following along that day with Greg sidewalking, my uncle on the right, Greg on the left, and captured this moment where the sunburst opened up and all these light rays came down. Hospice, as it turns out, was the most peaceful time in our lives when she was in home hospice care. When care and services came to us. When we no longer looked for solutions but embraced the present moment. Karly was very clear about this. Dying is part of living. That was a new thought for this mom. I had been fully committed to her living for 27 years. When it was clear that nothing more could be done, Karly was happy, peaceful, ready. Karly finished composing her final song with Karen 2 weeks before her death. We heard it for the first time at her memorial service. Leah was home for long stretches of time that summer to be with her little sister. My girls were always close, and it was so painful for Leah to see Karly this way. Karly's doctor and hospice team honored her end-of-life decisions with respect and compassion. She was ready. We weren't. Her last weeks were full of heartache and beauty. And I have to say that Karly walked us to death's door where she left us peacefully. I'm aware that our story turned out to be really remarkable. I don't share it to make anyone feel guilt or have regrets, but I hope it inspires you to believe the best of whoever you're working with. Find the thing that makes that child unique. Give opportunities wherever possible to allow them to show you who they are. Most people don't experience what families of children with complex disorders do. Having a child like ours keeps us from living on the surface of life. The depth of love developed over the years, days, months of struggle creates a bond that some never experience to the same degree with their children. Many of the incredible things Karly was able to do as an adult would not be part of her story if she had passed at a younger age. So we're really fortunate that we had her for as long as we did, because at the age between age 20 and 27, was when things just exploded for Karly. Karly gets the last word today. She wrote this poem near the end of her life in the middle of a sleepless night and titled it The Invitation. I brought her keyboard because she was restless in her room, and I said, "What do you need, Karly? Is there anything you need?" She goes, "Yes, I have something to write." And so she wrote this, and she never changed a word, or she didn't change any editing, so this is just as she typed it. The music of heaven fills my heart with longings I cannot ignore. The time spent on earth full of its possibilities becomes a distant memory compared to what I see through weary eyes. I leave my love behind to offer as a beacon. For those who wonder if it's true, I have seen, I have heard, I am certain. It's a small step for me now on this path. I hear the tears of many who have loved me so well. Love another like you loved me, and this world will be a better place. I see the face of God. I see my new beginning, and I am full of joy. I will watch for you. Please come. This poem is on a bookmark. If anybody wants to take it, you are more than welcome to. It's over on that table. It's our gift from Karly and our family to you. I'm aware of the time, Ted. Do we need to wrap it up for Q&A, or where are we at?
We plan to have a bit of a Q&A after each of the speakers, but we're going to have each of the three speakers come up this afternoon. I think we just need to absorb, be quiet, and let the story resonate as we take our first break, knowing that there will be a time when Lois will come back with Josie and with Lon, and we can have some Q&A. But again, would you just pause for a moment, take a deep breath, even before we take our break, as we respond to this poignant story. Thank you. I hope the standing ovation says this was important for you to say and for us to hear.
Thank you, Ted.
Let's take a break for a half hour. We'll come back at 11 o'clock.